to start with an acknowledgement of country. On behalf of those present, I acknowledge the people of the Wurrung and the Burrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. I pay my respects to their ancestors past. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians and ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. So welcome everyone. Good to see everyone. Good to see we've got our guest speaker, Shirley, our guest presenter here with us today. To run through the session, this hour that we've got with all the assessors. Just introduce the awards team. I'm sure you know the girls already. And then I'll introduce our guest speaker who will be presenting on how to effectively evaluate applications. And we're so lucky to have Shirley here with us with so many years of experience, not only as a DVC, but as the chair of the Teaching Awards Committee as well. Then after Shirley's presentation, we'll wrap up with some of the key assessment dates and the key responsibilities that we'll be asking the assessment leads to undertake, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So as you know, I've been working with a small team, Angeline Sim, who is my awards team manager, and Dr. Jin Yi, who is the awards team coordinator. And these two lovely ladies have been working with me for the last 3 or 4 years, actually, managing the awards and managing the awards on a shoestring. And I think going forward, the awards might be managed on an even shorter shoestring. Well, let's see how we go. And I might say a few words about that. And Shirley might want to say a few words about that at the end of her presentation. So those girls have been managing the awards, and an event like today doesn't just happen. You know, there's connecting people, sending out emails, organising speakers. And so Angeline and Jin have been instrumental in organising an event like today. Thank you. And that brings me to introduce our presenter, Shirley Alexander. I'm sure most of you already know Shirley very well. She is the DVC and VP, Education and Students at UTS. And among Shirley's responsibilities are leading the university's quality of teaching and learning, but also promoting the development of a strong student focus and culture. Shirley has worked at UTS for the past 20 years and has previously held positions of Director of the Institute of Interactive Media and Learning, and she's been the Dean of the Faculty of Education. Additionally, Shirley has got an international reputation for her research, especially around the use of ICT in education. She's got a lot of experience and is very passionate about learning and teaching, and we've seen her passion shine through in her role of chair as the AAUT Teaching Awards Committee. And she's held that role from 2018 to this year. We had a 3-year term and then roll over to the next person to provide that continuity of development and also expertise. She's led a number of teams of senior academics and of assessors and across her university as well. So today, Shirley will be looking at how to effectively assess the submissions. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Shirley.
So thank you very much for the invitation to come and present to the assessors. And before I start, I might just say a very warm thank you to all of the assessors. Having, as Angela said, I've been chair of the panel for the last 3 years, and I can't tell you how useful your comments always to the panel. So we're very grateful. I'm very, very passionate about the idea of national teaching awards. I think anything that we can do to raise the profile of teaching and learning, and more importantly, to recognise and reward really good practice. I think it's such an important aspect, and I've been a member of multiple iterations of national teaching committees for a long time. I think the first one was CUTS-D, if anyone here has been around as long as I have. There was CUTS-D, and then there was the Australian University Teaching Committee and the Office for Learning and Teaching. I've been on just about all of them. And since we've lost funding for that, it's absolutely crucial that we keep a form of national awards for learning and teaching, and that we keep the pressure on the Australian government to fund them. I really don't want to see with no offence to Lend-Lease, but the Lend-Lease Teaching Awards or the something or other teaching awards. Really, I'm working hard behind the scenes to try and ensure that we retain these. What I've been asked to talk about today is what to look for in assessing applications, interpretation of the assessment criteria. I didn't write the assessment criteria, but I'll just really talk a little bit about how I interpret them. And then just writing the constructive feedback, just starting with the first one of what to look for in an application. And this is just an overview of what I look for in a well-written application. And the first is the design process. We are looking at what is the evidence base for what's being done. Might be explicit links from pedagogy to the design of the learning experience, and not just labels. It's, as I'm sure those of you who've done this before know, it stands out a mile when someone picks out every label that they think is trendy at the time and puts it in the application. And sometimes those labels conflict and seem to bear no relationship to what the learning experience is that students are having. I've seen applications that talk about problem-based learning, then go on and describe a very traditional learning experience. So we look for what the evidence base is for what's being done from the literature, from pedagogy, to how the learning experience is designed. And then also, of course, in the case of a student experience, what are the links from the literature to the way in which the student experience has been designed? But also look at whether it's actually innovative. So what constitutes an innovation? A couple of years ago, people talked about using a learning management system as of itself as an innovation. And if that's what it is, it needs to be not that an LMS is being used, but how it's being used and how it's being designed. Judicious use of technology. This is something I have a very strong radar for. Is the technology being used because you can use the technology, or is it being used as a way of solving a particular problem or a particular challenge with students' learning? And I think I may have seen last year's award winner in the audience who was very strong on Jack pedagogy first. And yeah, so it's always very obvious when someone has seen a new technology and gone looking for a problem that they might be able to impose it on. We also look at who was involved in the design process. And with the various students as partners project, it's always wonderful when we can see that others have been involved in the design, and panels of students who have input into the design is always a good thing to see. So there's some of the things that we might look at in the design process. The next thing is the context of implementation. How is that being taken into account in the design? Is this designed for a large class? Is this a remote learning or a distance learning experience, and how has that been taken into account? Always wonderful to see how a narrative around how students experience that initiative. But we need to know, how do we actually know? And you'll sometimes see statements in an application that say something like 86.43% of students enjoyed using this program. I mean, it's stunning accuracy to 2 decimal places, but our challenge always is, what account do we really take of that on its own? Because students always enjoy doing something different. And so I'd expect to see a lot more in terms of how the students experience the initiative and what their feedback is. And that's why I have that question there, which is what actually counts as evidence for how students have experienced this initiative. So as assessors, I'm always grateful when you point out that these are just statements with nothing to back them up. Outcomes and impact is incredibly important, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that, but it's really, what was the actual goal that was achieved, and how do you know that you achieved the goal? And hopefully there will be multiple sources of evidence about that. So looking out for how they actually know that they achieved the goal. And then in terms of impact, I always look for evidence of a process of continuous evaluation with changes made as needed. It's the difference between running one subject 3 times over to a 3-year program of evaluating and improving the project. And then in terms of impact, has anyone else seen the value of this project or initiative, and in what way has it made any kind of contribution to the field? And so we would expect to see some kind of leadership in the field. So that's overall what I think an ideal application would look like. It's always interesting to see which universities have clearly got quite systematic processes for continuous improvement of the applications, in that they're often incredibly well written. And I do know that some universities have professional writers who do that. And it's great that they do that, but I'm always mindful of maybe the smaller universities where they don't have those kind of resources, to make sure that it's as even a playing field as it can be. But these are the things that I look for in an application. Now, I mentioned the outcomes and impact as being incredibly important. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what actually counts as evidence of outcomes. And so, as you know, there are a range of sources of evidence. So there is personal reflection. There is what the person who's doing the teaching is able to reflect on. And I'm sure you've all seen the statements that I did this and it was very well received. And I'm never quite sure what that actually means. Or people who say that they can tell by the looks on students' faces that they love it. Then there are what students say and how students rate this. Then there are the comments of peers, others who might do a peer review, have done a peer review of this. Then finally, there's employers, and this can often be the hardest evidence to get, is that in the case of student learning, that when students arrive in the workplace, they do actually know what the outcomes were, and they are able to demonstrate that change in understanding. So there are different sources of evidence. So when we say multiple sources of evidence, these are the kinds of multiple sources, and there may well be others as well. And then is the kind of evidence linked to a program objective? So one of the most common kinds of evidence that I see is a number that represents student satisfaction with the initiative. So if the objective was student satisfaction, then that's great, but often the objective of the program was something different. So I always expect to see whatever the evidence is does relate back to what they were setting out to do in the first place. And then what counts as effective? I have to confess to being a lapsed statistician, but there is often a lot of misunderstanding about the difference between what I would call random variation, what people might claim as a statistically significant improvement. And examples that I've seen over the years are people who say, well, last year in my class of 20, the average student satisfaction was 4.1, and this year it was 4.2, so therefore this is effective. Sorry, but that's random variation with a sample size of 20. You would need a much bigger effect size for that to be statistically significant. So sometimes what people claim as effective is just random variation. So I would just ask you to be very alert to the statistical techniques that are being used to see whether there is truly a significant difference. I remember pointing this out on an awards panel in one of the previous iterations of teaching awards. It was the OLT, I think, and the head of the OLT told me to stop calling myself a lap statistician because I talk about numbers and significance all the time. But you might look at things like confidence intervals, effect sizes, and so on. And qualitative methods, unfortunately, people still fill their applications with student quote, and you have to really try to understand whether this is really cherry picking of effective teaching or whether there is some more systematic approach to what they've done. And one of the things that I do at UTS is I read through all the student feedback. So we do a student feedback on subject, and I read through all those qualitative comments. And I know it's not uncommon, even in the high-performing subjects, to see a comment like, Shirley is the worst teacher I've ever had. And the very next comment is, Shirley is the best teacher I've ever had. So I'm always cautious about taking student quotes unless they really relate and add something to what is being written. Then in terms of evidence, I know there are a number of evaluation frameworks, but I just wanted to draw your attention to one because it illustrates the point I'm trying to make about how good is the evidence of the outcomes. This is the Kirkpatrick evaluation model that has 4 levels, and the ease of getting evidence decreases the further up the pyramid you go, but the value of the evidence increases. So the first level is a reaction evaluation. So how did learners feel about the program? So that's the lowest level of evaluation. You will see these, that students enjoyed using the project, or they enjoyed the subject, or they enjoyed the innovation. And it's good that they do, but it would be great to see, did they actually learn from it? So did the program improve the knowledge and skills of the students, and how? The third level is behaviour. Are the learning outcomes being applied beyond the subject and program? So they've transferred into other areas. And then the final level is the results. What is the impact of the use of those learning outcomes? So most evaluation still takes place at this level, unfortunately. And so, but always trying to look for evidence of outcomes beyond the reaction evaluation and more in the learning. Now go on to the assessment criteria. Hopefully most of what I've said you will see in the assessment criteria anyway. I've just presented them in a different way. So as you know, there are 4 assessment criteria. Each of them has an equal weight, so each of them is a 25% weighting. So the first one is a positive impact on student learning, student engagement, or the overall experience for a period of no less than 3 years. And that time period is important because then the applicant will have had the opportunity to try out their innovation or their project, to get feedback on it and to continue to improve, but also give them the opportunity to gather those multiple forms of evidence. As I said in my summary slide of what to look for, there are connections made between what the initiative is intending to do and how it's been designed to influence students. The impact on students' learning and graduate outcomes is sustained, and there are multiple forms of evidence. So these are all sort of linked really in the evaluation of the program. These 3 dot points are all about evaluation of the outcomes and the impact, and they've been able to show different sources of evidence to point to what that impact is. And then finally, that evaluation is not just done for the sake of it, but the evaluation outcomes are actioned and put back into the program. That is the first one. The second one is gaining recognition from colleagues, from the institution and the broader community. We would expect people who are applying for a teaching award to have received an award in their own university. Sometimes I know at my institution, staff go for a faculty teaching award, and then they go for a university teaching award, and then they go for a national teaching award. And it demonstrates that others beyond themselves value and appreciate what has been done. So that's one level. And then another level is that the initiative has been adopted at least across the institution or the discipline area, and it may have even been adopted nationally or internationally. It's always a very curious thing to me, and I've been working in this area for a long time, how rarely we tend to use each other's work and each other's resources. It's always a great thing when we come across a project where they're able to say that this approach has been adopted in these universities in Australia and these universities overseas. And here is the feedback that we have received from those other institutions. The third one is about showing creativity, imagination, or innovation. So I talked earlier in my summary slide about what to look for. What some people call innovative and different, it's hard to see what exactly there is about it that's innovative, because you've seen many other examples. But having said that, I always think it's good when I see someone who has an innovation that improves on practice because they've seen it in the literature and they've seen examples of the way someone else has done it. So it's not a new idea as such, but it's innovative because it's being applied in a new context. So, or in a new degree program, or in a new institution, or even a different faculty. To be innovative, it doesn't have to be something completely new. And I've seen an argument made in the literature that if we spent as much time adopting what we know to be effective, good practice, we would be a lot further on than if we were always coming up with new ideas. And the second dot point here is about a range of evidence to demonstrate how it's appropriate for the context and illustrates influence on student learning. So that comes back to the evaluation aspect, which I continue to highlight as being one of the most important parts of a program. But you can see that word novel implementation that speaks to what I was just mentioning. It might not be necessarily a new idea, but it's a new kind of implementation of an idea. The fourth and final criterion is about drawing on the scholarly literature on teaching and learning to inform the development of initiatives. In terms of looking out for and making judgments about these applications, I'm presuming that you all know the teaching and learning literature fairly well, and you can distinguish between an application that just pulls out all the buzzwords, and I mentioned this earlier, and an application where there is a deep understanding of the practice and it's very clearly embedded in the project. Evidence provided of leadership in scholarly practices. Are you a sole trader or a lone ranger, or does that person bring others with them? Often the sustainability of initiatives speaks to this dot point. If someone is a lone ranger and doing something on their own, as soon as they leave or move to teaching a different course or subject, often all that innovation will disappear. So this is really about sustainability of the project. And then, having done all this evaluation and learned a lot about it, have they made a contribution to the scholarship of teaching and learning? Has this been written up anywhere? Do they give presentations? Are they invited to give presentations to disseminate their work elsewhere? So as you can see, this particular criterion is worth 25% of the application. And it is sometimes where applications fall down because it hasn't really been widely disseminated. So it's something to look out for as assessors, because it is deemed to be equally important to the other three criterion. So that's all I was going to say about the criteria. And I'm just going to finish off with writing constructive feedback. I've seen applicants from my university who've received feedback from a whole range of sources. You know, you see them from ARC grants and you see them from a range of places, not just these awards. And even when I'm writing feedback on our UTS awards, I always try to put myself in their position and that is how to give people feedback in a way that makes it possible for them to take it on board. So as I'm sure you know, we ask you to comment on the strengths, and hopefully you'll be able to see a number of strengths in the application that you can call out. Then in terms of areas for improvement, I always think comments such as the evaluation in this is very weak is not as helpful as a comment that might say it is suggested that you engage in multiple forms of evaluation, and as well as the student reaction, you find a way of measuring the learning outcomes or the change in the learning outcomes that have been achieved. So it's a comment that's actionable rather than saying that's weak or that's not strong enough and so on. So I think that actionable comments is a really important piece of advice, and it really should be linked to the criteria. I have seen comments that bear no relationship to any of those criteria, and so it leads the person to wonder whether their application was really judged fairly. So that's all I had to say, and I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
We've got 3 of the past award recipients here. So we've got Matt Bauer, you're here, and we've got Jack Wang on the line. We've also got Michael Cowling. And I just wanted to know if what Shirley said, did it resonate with you, having just written an application? Are there things that you think you would look out for in future applications? So Matt, maybe starting with you.
Thanks very much, Angela. Yeah, very much so, and actually learnt a lot by listening to Shirley. You only really get to see your own application and sort of understanding more broadly and abstractly the criteria is really useful. I guess that there must be a real variety in what is presented, and trying to sort of appreciate the specific strengths of the applicant and balancing those and weighing those up against other applicants must be something that will be interesting and I think potentially a little bit challenging. And coming back to that must be the evidence that they provide around impact. So I think drilling always down to the actual evidence, not just to the claims that they're sort of espousing. So that'd be sort of my initial instincts on that question.
You're absolutely right. We sometimes get applications that have strengths in one area, particular strengths, and not so strong in other areas, and in completely different discipline areas. We've been in a situation where we might have had 3 applications that we feel are neck and neck for the award. And so I'm a big stickler for sticking to the actual criteria and going back to those dot points each time in each of those 4 categories. And that often is the way that we end up getting an eventual winner. But it can be very difficult. Matt, I remember your application.
Jack, do you have any comments from Shirley's presentation?
Yes, thanks, Angie, and thanks, Shirley. Lovely to see you virtually. As you were talking, I was getting flashbacks to the many times I rewrote my application thinking, oh, do I have to go back and fix it now? It's kind of like a last-minute haunting. But I think the key thing you said was really interesting because I'm from UQ and we do have a very strong institutional support mechanism. And we don't just see our own application, we do see other people's applications as well. The thing that stuck with me that you said, Shirley, was the use of comments and how for every good comment, there's a bad comment. And I think the advice we try and give is that comments are really powerful, student comments, but it needs to be triangulated with all the other data that you're showing, maybe reveal a different side. And I think some of the approaches, sometimes negative comments are very powerful as well to sort of show the starting point of the learning innovation. And that really tells a story more powerfully than you saying, hey, everything was rubbish before I showed up. That's kind of what I took away from it. But I just have to remember I don't have to write this anymore. I'm just evaluating it. No more haunting late nights, Shirley. All right, that's all I had to say.
Thank you. Shirley, there's a question here. How much should the assessors be influenced by the quality of the writing?
So when you're reading a large number of applications, it's very hard not to be influenced by the quality of the writing because it does make it so much easier to understand what the person's doing. But just as is the case when we are marking student assignments, we're really looking for those criteria. The higher quality writing for me just makes my job a bit easier when you're spending, 2 weekends reading the applications, but it shouldn't influence the final decision because it should be about, does it meet all of these criteria or not?
Now, Joe, I can see you on the screen, Joe McKenzie, and I saw that you've posted a question. Do you want to ask your question since we've got you on the screen?
Joe, you have a question for me.
Yeah, it's about, there's a new category this year for citations anyway, for casual academics, and I just wondered if you could give your views on how an assessor might consider applications from casuals compared with if they were from full-time academics who have more opportunities.
Had I not had the experience of reading some of the most extraordinary high-quality applications from casuals, I would have probably said make allowances. But I know that the whole committee last year commented on what high quality the casual applications were. But I don't know. What do you think, Joe? You're just as experienced as I am.
I guess I always consider kind of relative to opportunity. Same with early career, as in what's been the scope of that casual's appointment that has enabled them to do things, or what support have they had.
Yeah, well, that's true. But
I agree about the spectacular ones, though. I think I've seen some of them.
I know. And it's really about what they've done and whether they've been able to make that clear, whether it's great writing or not great writing. So it's not much of an answer.
Thanks, Shirley, and thanks, Joe. Pull out Mike. Do you have any questions or any comments from Shirley's presentation?
Coming from the CQU Virtual Scholarship for Learning and Teaching Conference, that Shirley was nice enough to spruik for me in the chat just before. So I'm wearing my CQU Birdie shirt. Apart from those sort of flashbacks that Jack was having as I watched Shirley, and I'm going, oh my goodness, and kind of going, oh wait, I've already got this award. I can't win any more of these awards. And then all of a sudden, Jack, I went, oh, phew. I don't have to worry, I guess I just endorse what everybody else said. It is individual. We do this internally, like you, Shirley, we do it internally at CQU. And each application is unique and they are quite different. And I'm sure Matt and Jack and myself and Amanda were quite different as well. But you can often spot that impact and you can spot what somebody's doing. And we talked about writing before, but I think ultimately having that impact and seeing that impact is still there. Is the thing you're really looking for in the application. So I'd encourage people to do that. But I think Shirley's right. The criteria do become really important. And if we're still using the same system we used a couple of years ago, Ange, it does a good job at keeping you in line with those criteria. But I'm looking forward to doing it again this year.
All right. There's last final question, Shirley, and then we'll move on. And that's by Greg Shaw.
I know it's mentioned in as a phrase in one of the criteria. So how useful is that, and is there any evidence that people make those comments? I know you have comments from students, but are comments from staff, the teaching staff, in respect to not their struggles, but their thinking about and responses to things that are happening? Is that kind of stuff evident? And not just from the perspective of the improvement of the course or the unit for the student learning, of course, that's got to be there, but also from the perspective of the staff member and their learning and their development in order to be able to do their job better within the realities and context of the environment that they're in and all the constraints that they face in respect to trying to do the job for the student.
Yeah, so I think in one of my slides, I mentioned different sources of evidence and one being personal reflection, and that's exactly what I mean. One of the things I love to read about is someone who might say, I tried to do this and it completely failed. And so what I did was I read through all the student comments, I categorized them, and then I realized the majority didn't understand why they were doing this or how it related. And so then I went on and I love those kinds of stories. it shows a reflective practitioner.
Thank you so much, Shirley. I really want to thank you for sharing with the assessors what to look out for in an application. What should count as evidence was a big key piece, and the other part that you looked at was the Kirkpatrick evaluation framework, which was, I think, really useful and helpful. With the assessors that are here, if they'd like to virtually clap or really clap, thanks, Shirley, for her.
Okay. I have to go to my 15th Zoom meeting for the day, so nice to see everyone and nice to see teaching and learning colleagues all together. It's been a long time. Okay, bye.
Thanks, Shirley. Thank you so much. A few things to wrap up before we close the session off. The reason why you can't get access to your individual applications is because they're not ready yet for you to get access. From the 18th to the 31st of October, the assessors will have access to the applications and they can start to assess the individual applications. And we're using Spark Plus. I believe most people are familiar with Spark Plus, and I think, Angeline, there may have been some introductory sessions to Spark Plus if you've never used it before. But if you've got any problems with accessing any of the applications, please contact Angeline or Jen and they will get onto that straight away. So the period from the 18th to the 31st of October, everyone does their individual assessment, and the assessors will be getting somewhere around 4 to 5. If you're assessing the Neville Bonner Award, you might be getting up to 7, but no more than 7. Generally, we try to give no more than 5 applications to each assessor. Then on the 1st of November, once everyone's completed their individual assessment, on the 1st of November, you'll receive an email from the awards team letting you know who's in your assessment team. So the assessment team, all the members of that assessment team will be assessing the same applicants, and you'll get to know who's in your assessment team. And then from the 8th and 9th of November, you have 2 days to go into Spark Plus and review each other's assessment, so you can see what others have written. And then between the 10th and the 21st of November, we will do the collaborative assessment piece. And that's when all the team members come together, they read through each other's comments, they've got an opportunity to moderate marks, change their results, influence each other, and you'll start to craft the feedback you want to give. And as Shirley said, think about the way you're going to frame that feedback. Ideally, we'd like to give the feedback where we highlight some of the strengths. For the applications that are submitted to national level awards, there will be some strengths there, but then also areas for improvement. So we'd like to give that feedback back to the applicants. And then the team members, of course, need to come to an agreement in the rating and in their comments. And then the team leader will review that feedback. And just wanted to cover some of the roles and responsibilities of the team leader. So before the collaborative assessment piece, the team leader will contact all the members of their team, organise a time to meet with their team, send you a calendar invite. We hope that that meeting is planned earlier than later in case you need a bit of extra time and you don't run outside of the times that we've provided you. Then during the collaborative assessment piece, the team leader will facilitate the meeting, making sure they're supporting the team members, always using positive and constructive language. They'll be referring to assessment matrix, and the idea is to agree on the final rating and the draft feedback. And then after the collaborative assessment, there'll be the final review. The team leader will be responsible to review the final piece of collaborative feedback, ensure that the team members all agree with their rating, and then email the team members of this is what we've decided on. Really to say thank you very, very much for giving up your time. I know you've all volunteered to do this. No one's getting paid to do this, outside of their time, but thank you so much. Awards like this can't run without a group like yourselves. It's really pleasing to see past award winners, ICOs, members of learning and teaching units within their universities. Really excited to have you all come together and contribute. Do we know who the team leaders are yet?
Yes, and on the 1st of November, in the email that we sent out to notify the assessors of the team members, we will specify who is the team leaders. Okay,
and then Michael, you asked me the $1 million question. Do we know what's happening for next year? So you heard Shirley. Shirley's really pushing for the awards to stay within the Australian government, and that's the ideal position we'd like the awards to stay. But COVID, the situation, the number of other priorities government's got on its plate, and internally with higher education, the biggest thing is our international students not being able to come to Australia. Their attention is placed elsewhere. It's not placed on the awards, and I think the government is asking universities to sort of say, where's your priorities? Is your priorities on the awards? Is your priorities on international students? Where are your priorities? And so the DVCs are thinking through that, and ideally we'd love the government to continue with the awards, but the DVCs group are exploring other possibilities to continue with the awards. One of the possibilities is we get industry to fund the awards, which is not ideal. As Shirley said, you don't want to have a University Teacher of the Year being funded by Adobe, because it's going to be about how are you using their products. Another alternative is to increase the membership fee that all universities are paying to Universities Australia, and then Universities Australia continue to run the awards. They don't really have the expertise. I mean, we are funded through the government. How it's working at the moment, the government gives Universities Australia funding, and then university pays my small team to run the awards. And that would require an increase in the membership fee for all universities if we were to go down that path. Another possibility is to draw on the expertise of the Council of Australian Universities, the Australasian Universities, leaders in learning and teaching. So universities pay a membership fee to be part of that group, and that group does look at professional development needs of academics and uplifting that capability development. So there's a possibility that they might take on the awards, but then maybe seek external sponsorship to find prize money. So that's sort of where they're sitting at the moment. We're still waiting to hear the direction they want to pursue. I'm leaving it in the hands of the DVC, A's. They're the ones that really need to be driving this. I'm here to provide them with advice, and, we are starting to archive all the material so we don't lose any of the work that we've done. I suspect that the awards will run in some way. In exactly which manner it'll run is still yet to be decided. So that's the current update, and I don't have anything further on that to add, but it gives you a sense of where we are at. Joe, you've written a question. Does anyone else think that the money is needed for admin of the awards, but that recognition is more important than money for awardees? I think we don't need to provide funding for recipients of the awards. I mean, it's very nice to have. I think recipients would like their recognition through a certificate, but you still need to. There's a lot of administration behind the scenes. You can ask Angeline. I've got 2 full-time staff, and they work night and day. They work on their nights and they work on their weekends. There's a lot of work there to be done. The communication piece, making sure everyone's on board. We have got fantastic evaluations in terms of, the way that we've dealt with our assessors, our ICOs, the DVCA, Universities Australia, all the applicants. There's a lot of stakeholders. A very high profile program, a lot of visibility. So everything we do is going to be critiqued and criticised and, looked over 1,000 times. High stakes sort of environment to be in, and it has been done on a shoestring, when we think of the budget cuts over the years and reducing funding for the prize money. But the girls have done a great job. Now, if they're looking to reduce it further, then you have to think about, will the quality be maintained? Will we still get the same level of engagement? I'm not sure, but the DVCAs will look into that. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Look forward to your contributions to the assessment, and looking forward to see who will be the recipients of the 2021 Australian Awards for University Teaching. Bye, everyone. Have a great night.